All right. Hi, everyone. I won't put you through the torture of introducing myself again, but we are back with Ellies Connect. Ellies Connect is a conversation series that invites previous winners of the Ellies to talk about their projects. Tonight, I'm really excited and honored to be joined by Ellies Award winners Gabriela Serra and Ezekiel Binns. I hope that you guys will participate in the conversation, so feel free to submit questions in the Q&A or the chat as we go through. And we'll take them throughout the night. So I'm just going to read a little bit of background for each of our winners, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Gabriela Serra is a multidisciplinary artist, certified restorative justice circle keeper, Reiki practitioner, and urban farmer, born in Caracas, Venezuela, and currently based in Miami. Her practice comprises filmmaking, photography, and community facilitation through workshops and support circles, and focuses on the exploration and regeneration of relationships between humans and non-humans, our bodies and the land, our present selves with our ancestral histories. With community, family, and friends, she is able to co-create intergenerational spaces and projects in which storytelling is practiced and honored, where we value the love and care of neighbors, making food and tending gardens together, where we can be vulnerable with each other. Although her art is often ephemeral, the relationships and connections formed remain transformational. Ezekiel Binns, the son of two Caribbean natives, Ezekiel was born in Miami, Florida. Utilizing his background in art and design, he explores his interests in the intersection of representation, communication, and form. After being awarded an Ellies in 2020, Ezekiel founded Jits Microfarm, a community-oriented agriculture project with his high school collaborator, Isaiah Littlejohn. So I want to go ahead and call Ezekiel and Gabriela up. You can unmute. There we go. Hello, hello.
Hey there.
Hey.
Welcome. So I want to start with you, Gabby, and just see if you can talk us through, and I'll scroll through some of these images, but just talk us through a little bit about your background in the Ellies. So you're a two-time Ellies winner. You won for a project in 2019 called Buenesas. And you won last year for this project, I think, which we have a bunch of images for, which is the Grandmother Songbook. So give us some background to what your projects are.
Thank you for having us tonight. So I did two projects with Ellies, and the first one, Buenesas, which the project continued until today. It just, like we just do different activities. But Buenesas was proposed as a series of workshops. I really wanted to, through my work in community organizing and also working with different farms, like local farms, I really wanted to connect different people and neighbors so we can learn from each other. It was more out of the curiosity to, I didn't go to college. For me, doing all this learning, I like to learn, but I never I wanted to make different classrooms, and I always believed that I learned a lot from different people or plants or
Right.
by observing. So I wanted to kind of continue that that idea.
Yeah.
Let's just create a classroom right here in this park, and let's learn from the neighbor that I know that she grows this plant, and that's the idea of it. But then I also brought in different like Corinne, that she has the Miami seed share that she collects and saves seeds for the community.
Mhm.
Those are images from the Buenesas, and we did it in different places, parks and Earthonos, Finca Morada, different projects in the community that that promote agroecology and
So wait,
different things.
tell us, what is Buenesas? Well, what is it as a translation, and also what is it at its core?
Well, Buenesas for me was when I started farming, my main interest was it just seemed so strange. We were planting all these things that it took a lot of effort and care to make it survive. And for me, I was always interested in these plants that just grew without water, without anything, and then I started realizing, I mean, this is knowledge that I didn't, I just learned this, but like when I was farming, like, wow, there's so many plants that just grow by themselves that are super nutritional, that have medicinal value, that in many countries and around, in many cultures, even in my own culture, but I didn't remember, have people make money out of this or make an economy. They trade it. And so for me, it was an extent, like Buenesas is how there's a movement of people calling them like good instead of maleza, which means bad, like weeds, like, because we don't take the time to really like get to know them. So for me it was, like Buenesas was that, like every workshop we talked about one Buenesas, and we prepared or made pigments together, made food, medicine, art with it.
And then your most recent Ellies project, can you describe that one a bit?
Well, that one, like we created during the pandemic because I was with my parents. I went back to live with them, and my grandma was like my roommate right here, like for a year. So my grandma's an artist, and I never considered myself an artist because I was always working, and I never went into the art scene. So I was like, wow, wait, my grandma's an amazing artist in Venezuela. She used to do so many great things. I mean, she's a lawyer, but her passion was music and art and all these things. So she used to have this school that she would teach people that never learned how to play music. And the third age, they were all elders. And so I'm like, well, let's I wanted to continue learning about trees, native trees, and tropical trees. And I always had this idea, like, oh, I want to do like a little university of grandmas, and like have them all together. So I guess this video is the first workshop we did together. So we kind of joined all those ideas, like, oh, let's make like the music, and we'll bring grandmas, and we'll learn from the grandmas about the trees that are our relatives too. Trees are like our elders, like our grandparents. And with that we'll create songs, because that's how, like in Latin America and the Caribbean, like we have so many songs with so much information about the trees and how people would use it, like the significance, like so like there we're singing to the calabash tree that I didn't know that it grew in Florida too. It's just like almost an extinction, because people don't grow it anymore. But the calabash tree is like major in the other parts in America. You use it for everything. So we were creating a song together there, and it was fun. Like there's kids. The idea is that there is intergenerational.
Right.
Yeah, and then we can share.
And Ezekiel, let's talk a little bit about Jits. How did that come about? And what was the thought process when applying to the Ellies with this?
So Jits came about, I guess, also as a result of the coronavirus and the pandemic and staying at home and just being kind of like idle and bored. I was in architecture school, but doing it through Zoom like we are now, and I needed something to do in my spare time. So I started growing plants indoor hydroponically, just out of curiosity. And I've always had an interest in nutrition, and because of my mother, who's like a nutritionist and a nurse, and science and biology and stuff like that. And so like I just started growing these plants at home, and like consuming them and eating them and learning about them. And then when I moved back to Miami, a few weeks into the pandemic, I brought that project down to Miami and I introduced it to my collaborator who I went to high school with, Isaiah. And we were just like, let's do this during the summer, because we were at the time really uncertain of what would take place after, or like in the next few months, because the pandemic was still pretty serious at the time. And so long story short, like we both like got racks and like started growing these things indoors, and we were like, let's create some kind of like project for ourselves that would be partially like a means of income, and then partially like a publication or some kind of community initiative where we'd be not only distributing like live organic micro produce, but also free and accessible graphic publications that are educational and like teach people about like plants and like nutrition and food and like stuff like that. So I think like similar to Gabriela's project, it came from like an interest in education and like the value of workshops and community knowledge sharing, and like public access to information. I think were some of the key things that drove us to start this project.
And I want to talk a little bit about both of your projects, because I think that they really stemmed out of Little Haiti as a community. And funny enough, when we were, discussing this earlier, to find out you guys were like pretty much neighbors working on Ellie's projects in different years from completely different conceptual points. But I do think that there's a really interesting relationship to what Gabby says, like living with her grandmother in the pandemic, really creating this idea for this grandmother song workshop space. And Ezekiel, you talking a lot about like the relationship with your mom and her being a nutritionist, and like almost this kind of knowledge that's ingrained in family and in community, and how you've both found artistic and creative ways to create almost like an open source space for others to engage with it. So maybe Ezekiel, can you talk a little bit about like your interest and how your practice does that? I think through design and through study, you found ways to kind of give back in a sense. And I know that Jits is still kind of in development and underway. So this is like a nice point to talk about it, because I think it'll evolve. But what is the value of that for you as an artist, to like create something, but almost make it, give someone else the authorship of it as well, because you're giving them the information?
That's a great question. I think to respond to that, I would go back to my childhood and just the genesis of me even being interested in any of this stuff, mainly art and design and like science. Similar to the things that Gabriela has done with her Ellies, like these free workshops within communities. Like my mother, she took me to a bunch of things as a child, like the old MAM Art Museum before it was PAM in Miami. Whenever they had programming, she would take me on the weekends. Home Depot had workshops on Saturdays that like would teach you how to like make a birdhouse. And like stuff like that got me really like, I don't know, like obviously like, I don't know what it did, but obviously it did something that just like made me interested in like art and making stuff, and also like science and biology. And so for me in my head, the only way, because like when I move around Little Haiti, I just really see myself in a lot of these kids that I like pass by when I'm walking or driving through the city. And I know that there aren't like a lot of great influences that are just like openly in the air in these neighborhoods. And so, and it's really just about like kids really just need something that's interesting and compelling to like capture and inspire them to then like develop a passion that they pursue from a young age, which is kind of my story. And so I want Jits to be that for somebody's child.
Yeah. So you would say that your project is like focused on youth kind of education and engagement.
Yeah, youth. I mean, I'm kind of playing off of the adolescence part because it's also microgreens and like juvenile and like stuff like that. But ultimately it's I'm trying to also with the graphics and the communication and the representation make work and make like visuals that are like accessible enough for all age groups and compelling enough for all age groups. And even in the text, one thing that you guys can see me doing on the screen is I'm going between like the 3 main languages of South Florida, which is Creole and Spanish. And that's a large part of like what this project is about, is just like, yeah, creating content that's easily digestible, not esoteric, because horticulture is very esoteric, or it can be, especially microgreens. So for me, it's kind of like, it's not that deep, but it is really pretty. So that's like, that was really it for me. I was like, it's really simple and it's really pretty. So if I can like present this in a way that's like compelling and visually interesting, I can get children and like adults and just people in general interested in like growing their own food indoors.
And Gabby, can you talk a little bit about like what that value is for you? Because yours is so workshop based, and I think too you've probably seen it grow over the last 2-3 years now, being 2022 from when SS being funded in 2019. And you were also doing this project pre-pandemic, must I say, like right before the pandemic hit.
Oh my God.
And it seems like it still really had an impact and like a huge life during, lockdown and the pandemic itself.
Yeah, no, and even before that, like we were doing we started with semillas, which was another like workshop based, like herbalism.
Mm.
But yeah, like I think everything that starts, like my approach to farming and doing community work is like it's your in your journey, like healing, like from suffering from depression, all these things, like you do like a lot of individual work, but then you realize that this is something that you need also communal. For me, like a lot of the healing that we have to do, yeah, you can do it individually, but it's really important to have support of your community, and also to define community in these times when like we're moving so much. Like there's like came to Miami when I was 16. I moved like 20 times, I don't know how many times, like going from place to place, like the rent gets higher or your landlord kicks you out, like all these things. So for me, like doing these workshops and at least connecting to people that regularly go, sometimes you get a lot of new people, but you also get like people that come back, and it forms like a little community, like of people that you get to like, that it's important for me. That's why like and Ezekiel, you were living next door, like your grandparent, like your grandfather. Remember Mr. Stanley, like he's like always gardening. Your mom also coming from work with like herbs, and for me it was very meaningful that a stranger inviting you, like, hey, you want to come to a workshop, and they show up, with like for me, like doing those little things. And even if we sat down that day in the place and just talked, like that for me has a lot of meaning, like to connect with others that live nearby. And I mean, that's how I grew up, and little by little I see that it's getting a little lost because of the culture and like how we carry on with our lives, like the technology, so many things, involved.
And Ezekiel, you actually went to one of the Buenas workshops, right? Like not knowing who Gabby was or what was happening.
Yeah, which is crazy. Like it's such a funny, because basically she had the program at this farm in like Little River, Little Haiti. I think it's called like Earth and Us. And
Yeah.
yeah, me and my mother and some friends just like found out about it. And I think I don't know if you told us about it or if I just like pulled up, but we pulled up and it was
No,
great. She taught us about like medicinal plants. Like there was this plant that was really cool to me. One of the ones that she showed us was a plant that like you would chew on and then it would make your mouth numb, and it's like a toothache like a remedy. And I think
Toothache
that
plant.
level of interaction was like really cool and like really exciting, you know. So it was a really cool time though.
Yeah, and I just left the, I left like, I would have like these brown bags and like write down like, hey, go to this workshop and put it on, on the cars. And I think your mom got it from her car and she read it. I'm like, oh, awesome. This worked, you know, this way of inviting people over.
Yeah, yeah. And so Gabby, I remember with Buenas, like the Ellie's proposal was really to one, host these workshops, to share information, to educate, to learn together. But I know you made a guide out of this, you know, which became like a digital takeaway. I know you had a few copies and you, I think, placed them in like local spots in
Oh,
the
the
community
neighbors.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
From the
So
garden.
yeah, so Ezekiel, do you think with JITS you might have some sort of like takeaway or some sort of element that kind of compresses all the information gathered over a period of time that can become accessible to either the community or the youth, or like what is your kind of plan?
Yeah, so right now, like I think ultimately similar to the comic that you showed earlier,
Hmm.
it'll take a form of like an annual or like biannual, like half of it, like 2 times a year, like
Right.
publication. That's I really like tangible like paper products, but I definitely do see the value in being present online. And so we have an Instagram which we like make post in like informational posts that shows like recipes and like gives information about certain plants and certain like seeds and certain processes that you can check out on the Instagram. Eventually, we definitely would like to create a website that's kind of like a newspaper in a way that just like it would be like super rudimentary and like just contains all the information that we've journaled through our experience of like growing these things at home and what we've used them for. And yeah, because the project, the start of it, like I mentioned, was super personal to us, and we would just journal what we discovered about these plants and consuming them over the duration of like 3 months. And so we do have a lot of information that we are excited to share once the visuals are kind of put to it.
Yeah, I really like what I think what you both did. And Gabby, I don't know if maybe you can drop the link in the chat to where everyone can find the guide online so that they can look with us. But I think that visuals are so important to what both of you do. And I think, Ezekiel, I know you have a background in design. And like you said, you really want like it to be visually engaging to a specific demographic, but also visually accessible and interesting, which will get people engaged. So can you talk a little bit about like what are kind of the core driving things that are guiding Jits's development into this guide and this online and the branding? And I mean, this is such a beautiful illustration that you use as the logo.
Yeah, principles.
Sorry, I'm pulling out all the hard
Are,
questions tonight.
I don't know. I guess it's like it's partially instinctual, right? Like there's a certain sensibility that I have based off of all the accumulation of like things that have affected me in my life. But I would say, like, just to like make it a short answer, like it's a I don't have the answer immediately, honestly. But I would say, like, in general, in terms of creating something that's visually impactful, there has to be a level of intrigue, meaning usually for me that comes from like introducing something strange or familiar in a strange way, or something familiar in a strange way.
Right. And Gabby, you also have like a very specific identity to Buenesas, and I'm sure the songbook that you're producing now for your new grant will as well. So can you talk a little bit about like the creative side of making this information and this kind of outcomes that are happening in the workshops, and how they become like a product in themselves?
Mhm. For me, like honestly, I get super caught on the aspect in that storytelling, you know, like making that day special, cooking something, like I get like that, like very excited, and then it's a little bit like more work for me to do the whole visual, because but I think it's important to like write it down, like all this information that we heard from like people that were around us. But it has taught me like this project also to let go a lot, because if I'm collaborating with so many people, like I might have an aesthetic, but like maybe, you know, like somebody else doesn't, and I don't want to be like, no, that's not like you know, art, or that's not artistic enough. Like I just yeah, like beautiful, you know, like I like to be very open to I mean, for the guide, I collaborated with Monica Isirovic and Nicole Salcedo. I love everything that Nicole does. And also with my friend Patricia from We Collective. But yeah, like some of the writings, like people were just free to write whatever they wanted to submit. For the
Yeah.
songbook, that's another thing. Like, yeah, like maybe I wanted in my head the song to sound a way, you know, but it came out another way. So I'm like, but I'm, you know, I'm in that process of like appreciating everybody's creation and like co-creating, you know, like making it. And it's a very experimental too. For the songbook, I wanted it to be very decided. I'm not doing anything digital. I'm really bad at like sitting down on the computer. So I'm gonna do everything, you know, like very old school with like, so let's see how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And can you both, like I said, I think it's really nice that one, Gabby, that you were funded for a project, were able to complete it, and you got another grant for something different, and you have both have projects in progress that are completely unknown as to what the true final form will be like. But I think for a lot of people who are watching tonight, who are maybe possibly thinking of applying for an Ellie and might have ideas that range from a painting to some sort of workshop or education kind of space. Can you talk a little bit about what the Ellies has done for you? Like, what is your experience as artists working through a grant program like this, having such open-ended, really community engaged projects?
You can go first, Gabby, if you have a response.
Yeah. Well, for me, like having the you know, the economical support, like for me not to worry if people pay an entrance or not, you know, like I be able to invite anybody, have like food, or sometimes, you know, invite someone, an elder, to play music, have that freedom of like
Right.
being able to organize this and be able to compensate people, like, you know, and it's huge, you know, like I mean, I have a regular job, you know, like I don't go to galleries. I'm a little bit far away from, you know, the art world. So for me to be able to have the means to do a project is huge, you know, like I mean, it represents a lot for me. I was doing it out of pocket. So for me, like now it's like, okay, like I can focus on like on the creative side or the organization, you know, like the coordination.
And was
And
2019 the first year that you applied for the Ellies?
yeah, it was the
Mm.
first time. I never applied for anything in my life. Like
Yeah. You
I
see,
did
guys,
apply,
don't
yeah.
be shy. Don't be
Yeah.
shy.
No,
Just apply.
seriously. I know if I did it, you can do it. No, like I did, I did apply for by Miami Day public something like
Yeah.
it was like a public spaces. That was my first one. I'm like, oh, and I got super confident. I'm like, I'm gonna apply for the Ellies. But yeah, apply for it.
What about you, Ezekiel?
Yeah, I would say like the Ellie's kind of like it was cool to see that an organization or someone on the panel or whatever was supportive of my curiosity. I think that was the most encouraging and empowering thing about it at the top. And then to go further, I would say that so basically like we started this project with the intention of making money off of it by selling locally, but as the pandemic worsened and we had more kind of like constraints because of this idea of like delivering produce, you know, and the hygiene of it and all of these things, I became less interested or kind of convinced that it would work, and I began to just focus more on the kind of like publication, educational, community outreach initiative side. And the funding that I received, like I wouldn't have been able to like mainly focus on that and like leave the other part of it actually becoming a business behind temporarily without the financial backing of the grant. So I think that was super important to me.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And I think something you say, like, you know, that shift that you made in the project when things changed in the world or the project grew or it got smaller or your situation changed, I think that's also like a really nice part of the Ellies is it understands that things change, like from the moment you put it on a piece of paper to when it has to become a reality. I think, you know, for Gabby, Buenesas maybe was a small idea and now it's still happening 3 years later. And she's probably either seeking additional funds or has, you know, ongoing supporters or, you know, it's expanded outside of the scope of her thinking, I'm going to get a grant, I'm going to fund this for a year and I'm going to produce a book. I know there's a bunch of people, a bunch of my friends that go to the workshops and are still active, you know, followers of Buenesas. And I think with the Ellies being such a simple application and really just at its core wanting to support artists' ideas and dreams, it does allow artists to like experiment and learn like the ins and outs of the growth of being an artist and trying to produce a project at different scales. But I do want to ask each of you before we close, and I want to just mention that Gabby dropped the link in the chat to her Buenesas guide. If you guys want to go ahead and click on that and save it, you can see what came of that first 2019 project. But I do want to ask both of you before we close, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat now. What outside of these projects are you working on? Like, what is the practice outside of these specific projects? Or is this kind of you at your core as an artist? Is this one particular moment in time? Ezekiel, do you have other things that you're working on that are more design based? I know you work collaboratively a lot, but I'm not sure if you're working towards something else for 2022.
Yeah. The transition from me, I moved back to New York, and I work a full-time job now. And right now I'm working on a film project that has nothing to do with Jits. I still microfarm, like inside of my apartment and stuff. And that's been an interesting process. I'm also still in school, like architecture school. And so like these are, I think at the core of my interests, like you mentioned in the bio, the core of my interest is definitely representation and like fine art and design and stuff like that. I think that, yeah, I think about it all the time in retrospect. Like Jits, in my head, I was like, I never really wanted to be like a farmer. You know what I mean? Like I was like, it's definitely something for me to do, and I really enjoy doing it. But I think at the core, like I'm really interested in like communicating ideas through visuals and through art as a medium of communication. And so that's kind of what I'm focusing on now. Yeah,
Can you
is like
tell us what this film is about?
it's about heat.
Oh,
Yeah, in the broadest sense. So I've been, and as it's been getting warmer and it's been becoming spring and heading into summer, it's exciting also to just see like life come alive again and stuff like that, in the way that the dynamic of New York City changes. And also it's connected largely to the Jits kind of sensationalism of like life and birth and stuff like that. But
Sounds really beautiful.
yeah, I'm excited. I want to do like a huge screening for it. But I'll keep you guys posted on
Keep us
that.
posted, yeah.
Sure.
And Gabby, what about you? What are some of the other projects that you're working on right now besides the grandmother songbook?
oh my God, like I have like 5 jobs, 5 part-time. I'm working with an organization called SEPA, is Decolonize PR in Puerto Rico. And I work with them. I work in their garden and doing their medicinal herbs, but I also collaborate in any way I can. I work gardening. I work like in doing maintenance and stuff like that in gardens. And I work in Song of the Spirit with B. Anderson. She's based in Jamaica, but we work long distance, and it's an online, it's a space where we have a program of a lot of workshops and classes preserving indigenous traditions. And I work also with the Healing Justice Fund in Miami with FAMSAGE. They're a big family in Miami. So I'm hoping to do a lot of art programming and events with them this year. And yeah, and in the meantime, I'm also learning from different artists that are working with like pigments, plant pigments, and textiles, and with them looking for land so we can do, like, the ultimate goal is to have a space where we can do this like huge classroom where we can learn from the land, and we can also steward, and so I mean that little by little.
Yeah, you got a lot going on, but no, that sounds great. That last idea with the pigments sounds like an Ellies proposal. But you might have your hands full this year. She's like, no more. Well, I want to open it up to the audience. If anyone has questions, go ahead and send them our way. But if not, I don't want to hold these two too long. I do want to just like reiterate, like, I think you guys do a really great example of showing that like artist and art is such a loose definition. I think a lot of times people think of art as a painting or a photo or something that hangs in a gallery, but really it is just like an engagement point and a way to connect with one another and talk and discuss and learn together. So I think that you two are really great examples of what an idea can be and what it can become. And so anyone who's tuned in that's truly questioning whether or not they should stay up late and work on their application after work, or think if they should or should not submit based on whether or not they've shown in galleries, I really do think that the Ellies is a great way to just put an idea out there and hopefully get to make it a reality in some scale and some capacity. So I don't see any big questions from the audience, so I thank you both for joining me. Thank you so